Welcome, everyone, to the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute's tri-annual town hall, where we bring an expert roundtable of discussants together with OLLI members and our colleagues in the Division of Berkeley Extended Education. I'm Susan Hoffman, the director of the Osher Institute and the Assistant Dean of Lifelong Learning in Berkeley's Extended Education. Today's town hall we'll start, as been our custom, with Professor Darren Zook introducing the town hall's theme and today's esteemed guests who have been invited to address the question of balancing the greater good as a society and as healthy individuals. They will speak and then we will open up for discussion with your questions. Please post those questions in the chat. Unfortunately, Charlie Halpern, who was hopefully going to be joining us, cannot join us today. We will find another way to bring him in since his perspective as an activist attorney, lifelong and recent instructor at Berkeley Law School in meditation, sort of does that balance better than so many others that I can imagine. So we hope to have Charlie at some point soon. We will record this session, but we will not be broadcasting the recording in the interest of having a candid conversation today. This town hall was designed with a sense of how difficult this current period is, and with the intention that within ourselves and our communities, we can find hope and exigency. Darren Zook is one of the most popular instructors on campus and at OLLI who teaches in politics and global studies. Darren, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Susan, and good morning to everyone. Welcome to the town hall, which is on a topic that may seem to many of you crazy, radical, and revolutionary, how to find balance and hope in troubled times. I teach a class on international human rights. Actually, I've done an OLLI class on this as well, and I often, tell my students, I say, after I'm telling them what seems like bad news after bad news, it's like you've got to keep perspective, because if you lose your perspective, if you give up your balance and hope, then you can't help make anything better. It's okay to take care of yourself during troubled times. And we have a wonderful panel of experts who are here to tell you how to do exactly that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the first of our three panelists, and that's going to be Elizabeth Svoboda. Elizabeth is a science writer and contributor to Scientific American, Discover, and the Boston Globe. She's the author of What Makes a Hero? The Surprising Science of Selflessness. She also has a new book coming out next year called The Art of Pacing, which I'm sure she'd be happy to tell you about. She's working on a book right now with The Art of, The Art of Pacing Ourselves in an Overclocked World. But I also wanted to say she contributes to Greater Good magazine right here at UC Berkeley. So, Elizabeth, I will yield the digital floor to you.
Thank you so much, Darren, and thank you everybody for being here. And in these difficult times, one of the things I've been thinking about lately is this idea of pursuing hope and progress by seeding discussions and communities really on a human face-to-face scale. And one thing that I think has been so discouraging for so many of us is we feel so overwhelmed, and some of you may be feeling this today, by the scale of everything that's happening, that we don't think that we can help in ways that make an actual difference. And I was talking to the psychologist Paul Slovic about this false belief that a lot of us have, like this belief that we can't really do anything that's meaningful. Like we say to ourselves, well, they're threatening people by the millions all over the country. Like what I can do won't even make a dent. And I mean, what we see though is when people have these kinds of beliefs, we know that they're less motivated to take any kind of action. But so what can we do to lift that sense of defeat? Well, what seems to help is when you start to help specific people who are suffering and also raise awareness about what people are going through. And not only do we respond with more compassion to people whose stories we know and are familiar with, we can kind of awaken that compassion in others by sharing those stories with them and asking them to help. And when we do this, when we go to the human scale, what Paul Slovic told me that stuck with me, like we can open up these windows of opportunity where we're no longer feeling so numb. We're starting to feel energized and effective. And I think there was a great recent example of this in LA where people at Homeboy Industries, some of you might have heard of the gang rehabilitation program, they decided to help food vendors in their neighborhood who were afraid to go sell their wares because of ICE raids. So on a particular weekend day, people who knew these vendors and knew their stories, volunteered to run the food stands for them and then give them the money that was earned. And Father Greg Boyle, who founded Homeboy Industries, said, it was a small thing, but it had kind of a mighty reverberation. You do what you can do, and it fortifies us. It strengthens everybody. And along those lines, too, another thing that I talked about with Paul Slovic was the hope and the motivation that you can find when you're part of a supportive human scale community. And anthropologists have sort of found that humans naturally tend to divide into social groups of about 150 people. Of course, online, all bets are off, but traditionally, we gravitate toward these kind of tight-knit groups. And in those kind of human scale groups, we grow accountable to each other in ways that make us less likely to tear other people down. And there's more opportunity, I think, for meaningful consensus, meaningful progress. And on that note, I recently spoke with Saul Perlmutter. Some of you may know him as a scientist, but he's also very interested in the art of bringing about human consensus. And he studied this process called deliberative polling, which turns out to be really good at helping to solve problems on more of this human scale. And the way it works is you start out with a representative sample, maybe a couple hundred people from the community, drawing from all groups, all races. You want a cross section. And then that group meets first in these small discussion circles and then all together to sort of figure out the best way forward on a difficult issue, whether it's how to regulate emissions, how to open up sports programs to trans athletes, what have you. And what's interesting in these groups, what Saul Perlmutter noticed as he was studying these, he's like, people are really able to think together and talk together and work things out together a lot better than their leaders can. And people who participate in this process say that they change in ways that they didn't expect, and they come away wanting more of that kind of engagement. I think in part because it helps them feel more involved, more effective, like they matter and they're working on solving these problems. And so some of you might have read one of my favorite books recently was The Serviceberry by the biologist Robin Wall Kimmerer, and it's basically about cultivating the kinds of communities that save us. And I think in a lot of ways, Kimmerer and Perlmutter and Slovic are sort of on the same page. They all believed that to thrive, we have to create this obligation, this reciprocity that comes about through face-to-face, one-on-one exchange, like when we're relating on a human level, rather than, say, venting at each other on social media. And sometimes, too, what happens in these community-based conversations and exchanges is that we start to focus maybe less on proving other people wrong or making sure they get what's coming to them, and then more focused on what the Michigan Senate candidate, Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, calls getting them to being right. And what does that mean, getting them to being right? It's never about knuckling under, excusing things that are not excusable, but it is about listening in ways that create a space in our dialogues where ultimately people may feel safe enough to say, like, you know what, I might have made a mistake. And this kind of empathy might feel too conciliatory for some of us. But the interesting thing too about Al-Sayed's approach is he calls for coupling that empathy and that community with major policy shifts on a local, on a national scale. Like none of this, let's move to the middle policy wise to reach all the people on the fence. And when you're in a leadership role, politically or otherwise, I think people can tell when you're like so afraid of alienating people or so attached to what your focus groups are telling you you should do that you're not offering anything of substance. And Al-Sayed says, you know, you can't beat something with nothing. But what he thinks is with this foundation that you can build through human scale community and exchange, you bring people in, you bring people on board with things like accessible healthcare, fair wages, fair and compassionate immigration policy, like these humanizing things that people do actually want and need. And so striking that balance, like empathy and concern on this personal one-on-one level, and really principled resolve on a policy level, um, that can help us bring people in and move the country forward at the same time. And I'm hoping that with that prospect ahead of us, that balance, we can start to move, maybe by degrees, but still start to move from numb and discouraged and checked out to more cohesive, more hopeful, and more energized. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Elizabeth, lots to think on there. I put a note in the chat I want to call everyone attention to, which is if you do have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat and I will be reading them as our panelists are presenting, and I will be sure to field them to the appropriate panelist afterward. Next up, we have Marion Standish, who, after an earlier career in legal services as an attorney working for California rural areas, she then moved on and became senior vice president of the California Endowment, a $4 billion plus private statewide health foundation established in 1996, whose mission is to expand access to affordable, quality health care for underserved individuals and communities, and to promote fundamental improvements in the health status of all California. Marion, I now yield the digital floor to you.
Thanks, Darren, and thanks, Susan, for inviting me. It's my first foray with Ollie, so I'm really pleased to be here with all of you and a little bit nervous about, this platform. It's been quite a while since I've done a big Zoom call like this, so bear with me for a moment. As Darren said, I'm now retired from formal work, and I'm assuming a lot of those people in attendance are likewise retired and not in a formal work environment. And it really challenges us in a time of so much tension and crisis. How do we participate? How do we act? And, I'm going to talk about that for a moment, but let me just give you a moment of background about me and kind of the pathway that facilitates my taking action. First, both my parents were refugees to the United States. And I think I grew up in an environment where the understanding of tumultuous times was sort of baked in. I think my parents would always say to me, when I said everything's great in the United States, that they would question that assumption, and they would question a certain kind of complacency that we as Americans tend to have about the solidity, the permanence of our institutions, our democracy. And I kind of poo-pooed that, quite honestly, because I felt we would always be able to certainly vote, we would always be able to march in the street, we would always be able to speak our minds. And that's not to say, and I want to remind us that, we in this age cohort that we're in have been in crises many times. For me, I think of, the first crisis I experienced, the assassination of John Kennedy. And how did we feel? What was the level of despair, the kind of notion that nothing will ever be the same again? And of course, we had subsequent, catastrophes and assassinations. And one way or another, I think we have weathered that. And in early times, in those times, I think we felt stronger as a result. Certainly, the Vietnam War, Richard Nixon's resignation. I'm just sort of creating this kind of contextual world that we've grown up in, that many of us have grown up in, and understand that, yeah, we've been in crises before and we have weathered them. So the world we're in now is not entirely new. I think we have to come to terms with that. Now, admittedly, I don't think I've ever felt as threatened or as fearful as I do now. I want to be really candid about that. I think the power of social media has really changed the dynamic for us. The consolidation of media empires has changed the way the narrative is received and communicated. I think, I'm hungry for those powerful spokespeople, those influencers that really spoke to my heart, to my vision of the future. I haven't really found them yet, and I think we're missing them. The level of, I mean, cravenness of those on, in other, sectors and elected office that just don't seem to speak up at all. And I think the level of hate and anger and divisiveness, all of this feels more intense than it ever did, even in the context of all those other catastrophes. But having said that, I do want to say that, I am a very positive person about the future. I feel very hopeful. And I think the place, and I really appreciate Elizabeth's comments here, because I think where that comes from is having a set of values and vision for the future. What is it that we want? What is it that we believe in for the future? And I think that could be a very audacious view. It doesn't have to be, just that simple pragmatic view of, yeah, let's have a government shutdown or let's, get the ACA subsidies reinstated. But it could be a really deeply held and profoundly held vision for the future. What is the justice? What is the society? What is the environment we really want to live in? And come at our actions, come at our participation from a place of strongly held values and even audacious values. Because I think that's where we are inspired to take action. And, I have over the last several years, and I would say even beginning in 2016, um, become more involved in very community-led, very grassroots efforts that help identify constructive pathways for me, my friends, my extended friends, network to be activated and to be part of the change we want to see. And I think oftentimes that concept feels so remote. It feels like something some other entity or some other organization is doing. But the truth of the matter is that we find power in our community. And our community can be our network of friends, it could be our neighbors, it could be our faith-based organizations, it could be many different things. And so, just to sort of cut to the chase here, we in the beginning in 2016 and for all those years and certainly in the last election had a small group of friends that were writing postcards. And many of them were people who could not really do marches. They couldn't do a lot of the activism that they saw others doing. And after postcards and after the recent election said, let's keep getting together. And we came together and we started out as a group of maybe 8 or 10 of us. And it was just a conversation. How are we going to support each other? How are we going to find balance and hope in difficult times? And I think what we realized is the idea of hope. This is not a passive concept. It's not a faith. It is an action. It's really, and I think of Alicia Garza, she said, hope is not the absence of despair. It is the ability to come back to our purpose again and again and again. And I think holding your values close and as the important motivating factor, what it is that you want, brings you out of any kind of despair and brings you to hope that is action, hope that is not a passive word. It's not something you sit in your living room with. It's something that facilitates your participation and action at whatever level you can take it. And we can certainly talk later if you want about what are the things that we are doing as a group. We are now a group of about 30 people that meet on a monthly basis, and we take actions and we find appropriate actions for people at whatever level they can do them. And we build, community, solidarity, affirmation, agency, and really the knowledge and the belief that without us, democracy does fail. Without us taking action, democracy does fail. So let me pause there. There's lots more to talk about, but turn it back to you, Darren.
Thanks very much. That's a lovely quote about hope. Thanks for all, a lot there to think over as well. We do have one more panelist to go, and then we'll open the chat to any questions that any of you may have. I have a few questions of my own to get us started in case none of you have questions when we finish with our third panelist. But let me introduce our third panelist. Our third panelist is Alessandra Carter. She joined the UC Berkeley Extension leadership team in 2024 as the inaugural Equity, Access, and Belonging leader. Driven by a commitment to service and social impact, she draws motivation from Daisaku Ikeda, Bell Hooks, and Michelle Obama as she is inspired by their respective ideas about race, equity, and education. Alessandra, the digital floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. And hello to everyone out there in our virtual space today. Similar to Marian, as she mentioned, I'm both excited and a bit nervous. I think nerves are good. To me, I define nervousness as meaning you really care about something. As was mentioned in my introduction, I have the wonderful opportunity to work at UC Berkeley. So Susan, thank you for inviting me to speak here today. I work at UC Berkeley in the School of Continuing Education, or at UC Extension. And so as I thought about what I wanted to share with this group today, I thought it would be important to name the things that may cause us worry or anxiety. And so forgive me, I'm gonna repeat some of what Elizabeth and Marian have already mentioned, right? So as I think about it, of course, there's political influences, political changes, right? So I think about the policies that are being enacted or have been enacted under this new leadership, but also the types of policies and the pace. So I think even that can be disorienting. If we think about the executive orders, the shifts even at the California state level, right? What's going to happen with this election in November, right? This policy that we're thinking about in terms of redistricting. So those kinds of policies alone can naturally kind of perk your ears up and make you a little curious, but also the pace at which things are moving. I think that causes some anxiety or some worry or makes us feel a little bit less certain. There's also some social and economic factors, right? So there's a number of people that have lost their jobs completely or are shifting from working full-time to part-time. They're looking to change to work into different industries. So it also has an economic impact, right? So these things that once grounded us, this pace of work or being able to tap into a certain professional or political or social community, now these things are shifting. And so that impacts us psychologically, where these things that once grounded us that made sense, or there was a certain threshold of maybe change that we were used to. Now there's all these political, governmental, social, economic, and now psychological factors that make us feel less settled. And so for me, right, as an employee that works at a public institution, my background is in nonprofit leadership and human resource management, right? But I've been at Berkeley for a year. I joined Berkeley 4 months before the presidential elections. And so I was just past 3 months into my new role when a lot of change started happening. And so I just want to name, right, that one of the things that I'm continually adjusting to is what does it mean to be an employee at a public institution who's responsible for guiding diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts internally for employees? What does it mean to thoughtfully and intentionally build relationships with community colleges and entities to help Bay Area residents access Berkeley classes? What does it mean for me to do that work given this change of pace? And feeling less settled and trying to kind of reorient myself into this new way of thinking and doing and existing. And so I've had to define and redefine what this world of DEI looks like. If I'm being honest, I think it's clear the landscape is shifting. I don't think that we're going to call DEI in a year from now. I think if we're smart, we will focus on engagement, relationship building, and access building, because the term DEI is now synonymous with a lot of things that can be very it's a hot button issue. It can be not just disorienting, but angering and confusing. Unfortunately, the term DEI has become synonymous with racial identity, immigration status, socioeconomic status, an assumption about your competency or how you may have gotten a role that you're into full time. And so when I think about the work that I'm doing and what helps ground me in my work and what I communicate to employees is what is within your realm of control? What is within your circle? What can you do? And so engagement, relationship building, and seeking allyship are things that I encourage people to focus on. So what does that mean? So I think Marion mentioned, oh no, Elizabeth, I think you mentioned, right, this idea that we typically have a circle of, I think it was 100 or 150 or so you mentioned, Elizabeth, right? This idea that we will have a community or a circle of people that help ground us and affirm our beliefs. So these social groups help us to remain accountable and affirm our identities. But what happens if the circle or the community that we are a part of no longer wants to hold us accountable, or there are shifts in the way that people think about accountability or value it? So that means that we have the onus is on us to really think about, okay, what new relationships can I build? What new information can I learn? How can I become an ally to other communities if my community is no longer creating this space for me? So for employees at Berkeley, that means that I'm running small trainings. We call them micro learnings. They're typically 45 to 60 minutes on Zoom because we do have a hybrid community. So they're exploring topics like what does it mean to be an ally at work? And that can be something simple like if you're on a team and there are always a mix of personalities and communication style. So one example could be if you know that someone on your team has a lot of great insight, but is not comfortable speaking often, making sure that you're sharing the mic, sharing the space, or engaging them to share their ideas in writing on Zoom, share it in a document if they're not comfortable coming off of Zoom and speaking directly. So an example of expanding your circle so that you have more people to hold you accountable and that you can kind of shift your mindset is the trainings that I offer to Berkeley employees. I also recently launched an employee working group, so specific to our division at Salex and UC Extension. So the goal of this group, and it's about 15 folks right now, is to create a space where employees can speak, can learn about each other. We'll review employee data as well and come up with 2 to 3 recommendations of what could it mean or what will it mean for employees to have a sense of belonging, inclusion, and respect. So what are 2 to 3 recommendations that can be presented to leadership? And my role is sits on a leadership team, right? So I'm the through line between employees and leadership to really have a lever to influence the employee experience. Then externally, um, I'm thinking about relationships on the city and county level. So, to what extent can there be an overlap between the goals that Berkeley has as an institution, right, to continue to be a space of safety and learning and valuing intellectual growth and community? What is the overlap between that and the goals that city or county entities have at the workforce development level or at the educational training level? So more to come, right? I think once we open it up to questions, I can share more information there. But I wanted to paint the picture for you in a couple ways. I wanted to name, right, things that may be impacting us as humans. I wanted to describe a bit about what it means for someone working at UC Berkeley that works for a public institution. What does it mean to create space and hold space for employees that are struggling to do their jobs, but also be good humans and be of service and serve others? And then what does it mean for the institution to be mindful and intentional about relationships that we want to build in this climate? So, with that, I will pass it back to Darren. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for all of your insights, all three panelists. This is so much to work with here. So again, everybody else here, all the Ollie folks, any questions or comments or insights, just put them in the chat and I'll be reading through them. But I will say all three of you in your own way talked really about how, balance and hope is kind of a way we live, not a point we reach. And I'm going to go back to our first panelist, but I'm going to give all three of you a chance to respond to this. I would say if I had one word to describe the news cycle and the pace with which things happen, I would say the word is relentless. Everything just feels relentless, like we're being worn down by it. And Elizabeth, since you have a book coming out on pacing, I'm wondering if you could start us off with how, maybe stopping the news cycle or stopping the relentlessness or how pacing somehow can lead us closer to balance and hope. Elizabeth?
Right. And this is such a big theme lately, and I appreciated too that Alessandra brought pacing into the conversation. I think we've all had this feeling, especially when it comes to the news and the pace at which it's coming at us, that it really feels like a fire hose and the water is coming out so fast that if we don't get out of the stream, we really feel like we're going to drown and we're not going to be able to turn our attention to the work that matters the most to us. And I think that this is where I like to bring in the importance of community too. Like we can't do it all. Like we can't engage, we can't listen, we can't do at maximum capacity all the time. And it's about acknowledging those limits, but also trusting that when you're embedded in a supportive community, like other people are going to be there during the times that you need to withdraw, that you need to take care of yourself. And one of the ways that I think we need to learn to be there for each other is to witness and notice when people are reaching their individual limits and think of ways that we can support, we can come through, somebody else can come through, and it becomes more of a relay race than a pushing ourselves to be on all the time, listening all the time, doing all the time, because that is very much a recipe for complete burnout, for not being able to do the work that we so much need people to do, especially at this time. So I think finding that supportive community is a big piece of pacing ourselves when it comes to being aware and also being engaged in a way that confronts this moment and meets this moment.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Marion, any thoughts on living a well-paced life?
Well, I'm laughing only because I wonder if for me I've ever lived a well-paced life. Yes, but I appreciate Elizabeth's comments and I just want to build on them a tiny bit. I think many of us understand that you know, intensity of what we're reading about or listening to, and whatever, media we're looking at is a manipulation. It's a way of creating a paralysis that there's so much coming at you, you just can't seem to move forward because it's a tidal wave. And I think it is intentional in that respect. And our question, or the question we've been struggling with, is how do we stay engaged? How do we act in an environment that is intentionally trying to paralyze us? And I think, again, for me and for the folks that I've been working with, we have a strategic focus. In other words, we're going to pick what it is that we can do. And that is both from an issue perspective and a capacity perspective. So, for example, some of us are very, very concerned with immigration and ICE raids and, the violation of basic civil rights. And so we organized ourselves to take a training on court observation. We buddied up with each other and we went to immigration court and we go regularly and we observe. And we have had any number of instances where the fact of our observation, the fact of our being present there in proximity to what is really happening was critical to those people whose lives were being so directly assaulted. So we come back to our set of values, our, priorities, and how we want to act on them. Because we know, I think Elizabeth was right on this, we can't do everything. But in our community, and for me right now, that's a community of, 25, 30 people, we're picking pathways that make sense for each of us. Some people are gathering up and they're writing postcards on Prop 50, for example. And, we meet in a cafe and we spend an hour writing postcards. And we're building community, we're building those relationships, and we're taking action. And I think staying in paralysis is what breeds despair. Taking action is what continues our forward motion, in active hope.
Okay, well said. Alessandra, would you like to add anything here?
There's so many things that I could add, and I'll try to weave in a response to a question in the chat from Greg in regards to using the term DEI or kind of shifting away from it. So I definitely echo and plus one to what Elizabeth and Marion mentioned, right? But that this idea of pacing and understanding how to create a healthy space or a healthy environment for you to thrive is deeply connected to this idea of how do we call what this work is? Because before DEI, it could have been called multiculturalism, it could have been called culturally responsive pedagogy. So the work has always been here, but what we've called it has changed. And so part of the value in protecting the work and keeping up with the pace, but doing things that are sustainable is choosing your battles, right? I think I saw some wording in the chat around there being a flashpoint, right? So this term DEI and the practice of building inclusive and equitable spaces has been kind of dismembered and disrespected and convoluted to a point where now people really don't understand what it means, like to create a policy that's equitable or to create programming or activities that are focused on supporting students or employees. It's now pretty convoluted. And so for me, the fight is still the fight. But if I need to call it engagement and access because I want to get around all of the drama and the drain that comes along with saying DEI, then I'd rather do that. because then I can focus my energy more directly on the work itself, right? And if you're thinking about, so I don't work in the nonprofit space anymore, but I have colleagues that still do. It's you have to be very careful about language now because in the philanthropic world, I think there's some sensitivity around how you talk about engagement and inclusion and access. And so there's a shift whether we are comfortable with it or not. There is a shift in terms of how you talk about equity and inclusion work. And so when I say, I think it's smart to kind of shift what we're calling DEI, I definitely don't mean let's do away with the work. Let's no longer create policies or programming that are rooted in equitable access for students and employees. I mean, in my opinion, it's gotten to a point where DEI is so, it's just been desecrated. Like it's just very far from what it was 3, 5 years ago. And so I think it's smarter to be more strategic about what you call the work. And so that's why, even my introduction, that I wrote for Darren, he used words like engagement and access, right? And so I focused my work on using words like that to help people understand what is the work itself so that we don't get caught up on a particular term. And again, this is just my opinion, right? I'm not at all advocating, for anyone who might be a DEI practitioner or involved in DEI work. This is my opinion as one employee who's supporting efforts and one human, right? Also a person of color, Bay Area resident, millennial. I'm naming all these parts of my identity. They're also shaping the way that I'm going about this work, right? So this is just my opinion, but um, I think I answered the question. I hope I did, but I'm happy to clarify for anyone. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Alessandra. We have another question here coming in from Cheryl about does anyone have any ideas on how to give this sense of purpose and hope to the youngest voters? And I'll share with you a couple of things, one of which is somewhat self-promotional. If you don't know about it, I've been running an intergenerational dialogue for many years now. I started it after the 2016 election. It's run through OLLI, brings OLLI members together with undergraduate students at UC Berkeley. And this semester's theme is the rule of law and the U.S. Constitution. So if you're interested, you can find it on the OLLI site. But here's another personal anecdote. On Tuesday, a very hot day, I had an appointment with a student, and I said, would you like me to move our appointment onto Zoom? And she said, no, because I'm tired of being on Zoom. I want to talk to people in person. So I think there's, yeah, when I'm talking to my students, they do have a sense of purpose and hope, but I like the question is more about how do we interact with them? So I'm going to go switch up the order here a little bit. I started with Elizabeth on the first question. I'll see if Marion has any thoughts on this. I know you talked about a group of folks that you interact with, but I wonder if there's any part of that that reaches out to people from a different age demographic. Marion?
Well, interestingly enough, one of the commitments our group has made is to host other smaller kind of salons or meetups with younger people and really begin to talk about, exactly the question that you're asking. And, just to go another step further, I really do believe we, and I mean us in this age demographic, have not created the kind of, I'll call it, I used the word audacious, and I want to use it again, because we have to really create a vision for the future that we believe in, that responds to what young people are telling us. And they're telling us a lot. They feel alienated from the participatory democratic process. They feel people that are, running for office are not representing them. They don't look like them. They don't talk like them. They don't have some of the same concerns that they have. And we need to really, and I think this is very important, what is it that is, that big vision that brings us joy, that brings us justice, that brings us equity and fairness, that will animate young people. I mean, you see the young people very enthusiastic about certain people running for office now. The potential mayor in New York. AOC is animating because they're speaking to the core issues that young people care about. And many of them are economic issues. Many of them are, kind of social fairness and equity issues. But we have to really change up what our vision is for the future and be able to articulate that. It's not just, what's the next win in front of us. It's really beginning to craft a big, audacious vision for the future.
Thank you for that. Alessandra, I'm going to turn to you next, and I'm just going to share with you one quick thing, which is in my discussions with my undergraduate students, one of the things I often hear is that, whatever we call the work of this kind of activism, whether it's equity, access, and belonging, is that they sometimes feel that the administration at UC Berkeley, it's a conversation about students, not one that includes students. I don't know if that's true or not, but they sometimes feel as if they'd like to have a larger voice in that. And I'm curious whether from personal experience or during your time at Berkeley, I know you've been here a relatively short time, whether you think that's an accurate assessment or whether you think the university is doing a pretty good job with this.
I do think that's a fair assessment. I think am I unmuted? Can you hear me? Okay, great. I think that's a fair assessment. And I think the necessary tension between student needs and student advocating for themselves and the constraints of leadership will always exist. So, for example, student encampments, I want to say about a year and a half ago. So before I started at Berkeley, there were a number of students who were protesting the Palestinian conflict, and they set up some encampments in a main area on Berkeley's campus as a way to draw attention to the issue. And so after I want to say this was April, May, June of 2024, so just before I started, students also had a list of not demands, but strong recommendations about what they would like to see from the campus in terms of supporting students from different backgrounds and creating even more space for free speech. There definitely were a couple months where things were tense between students and, Darren, you probably are even more familiar with this than I am, students and leadership, right? In terms of on aligning on what can the university provide for students, what's realistic, and what may encroach on student safety, what may encroach on policies at the state level. And so that's an example that I bring up in terms of this tension between, I think the student voice is always very crucial, and the students are our future leaders of society. But in my experience, particularly being a year into working at a public institution, there are a lot of constraints that students are not always aware of in terms of where the university sits and what they can do, whether we're thinking about the Board of Regents at the University of California, California State Legislature. There's always some constraints. So my answer is yes, I agree that like students will probably want to see more. I have a level of trust in leadership at the university level, particularly on the broader DEI team that I sit within. There are people from different immigration backgrounds, socioeconomic statuses, racial and gender identity. So there's a lot of actual diversity on that team. And so my level of trust comes from people's lived experiences, but also the efforts that I've seen them push forward on campus. Do I think we could do more? Absolutely. But I still have a level of trust that things will continue to improve, even despite the number of like factors at play.
All right, then. Thanks very much. I'll give Elizabeth a chance to address this, maybe from your work with the Greater Good Center on campus, or however you'd like to address it. Any thoughts on this? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. My first thought was actually I don't have voting age kids in my family yet, but I have some that are approaching voting age, and my almost 13-year-old in particular, I'm often thinking about how do I make sure that he doesn't get so much into this place of despair or the fire hose effect or feeling like he can't do anything that's effective. And he started asking me every day, like what are the big stories in the news? What's happening? And I think that's sort of like instead of going in every day reading it himself, he sort of found the strategy that works for him, which is to filter it through me. So I do like I'm very honest with him about what's going on, including some of the bad things and the scary things. But in most of these discussions, I also try to point to places where people are conscientiously resisting, whether it's a U.S. attorney who is willing to leave their job because they were asked to do something that was unethical, or just on a collective level, like most recently with Jimmy Kimmel, so many people engaging in boycotts, saying, we can't stand with Disney on this, engaging in protests, and that kind of collective action is actually having results. So when it comes to just bringing in the younger generation, like this very difficult thing that a lot of us are up against, whether it's university students or slightly younger people, in my case, pointing to those sort of bright spots and in ways that hopefully have them start to think about how can I find those points of resistance or those points of engagement in my own life, or even, just in the discussions that I'm having with my friends. How do I want to think about and talk about this stuff?
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. We have a couple of mentions here in our chat about an organization called Braver Angels that brings people together to have conversations with each other, not at each other. I'm happy to say that UC Berkeley's Bridge USA is now starting back up again. They were around for a while, and they kind of the student leaders graduated, and I just got someone approached me to be the faculty sponsor for Bridge USA on campus again, which I immediately said yes to. But so embedded in those comments and that are helpful for everyone, there's also this idea of how can we start, or how can we reach out to people who we know are different from us. I mean, all three panelists spoke to the idea that we have to have a sense of community, but we often think of a community perhaps as people that we feel comfortable with because they share our ideas. So this time I'm going to start with Alessandra. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on where to take that first step towards finding people that, may have a different perspective than us, may disagree with us, but also somehow building a community that includes difference in it, as opposed to building different communities that are separate from one another. Alessandra, any thoughts on that?
Sure, yes. I think one great way to start is through volunteering in your local community. So it goes back to what I shared earlier. Sometimes within our own realm, our own circle of family and friends, people hold the same ideas, and those ideas can become outdated. So if you're really seeking to build a community that's rooted in accountability or allyship, this idea of how do I become aware of the power that I have in society, maybe based on my gender identity or my socioeconomic status or my any other statuses, right? How do I use that position for good? And you don't have anyone in your immediate circle that can help you with that, volunteering literally, whether it's starting with, um, I have a neighbor who volunteers with the Oakland Unified School District, and they are a tutor for a pre-K school. So they volunteer their time twice a week. So they're really interested in literacy and the power of education. So they applied through Oakland Unified School District, completed a background check, and they volunteer their time. Direct action, right? Directly impacting educational equity by volunteering to help young kids in a low-income neighborhood with their reading competencies. Another example of volunteering is, going to a shelter or a place that provides a workforce development or even housing resources or food resources, like a food bank. We have lots of great food banks here in the Bay Area. Oftentimes, people who are volunteering have a similar idea or are looking for, how do I connect? How do I be of service? I don't know where to start. So I'm just going to start with volunteering my time. And once you start volunteering your time and you're open to meeting other people, that can be really fertile ground for building a new community. If you're really seeking to connect with other folks and you don't have that in your immediate circle, or you want to feel like you're a part of a greater movement or a part of a greater mission, one way to start could be with volunteering in your local community.
Fantastic. I completely second that idea. Volunteering is such a wonderful thing. Elizabeth, any thoughts on reaching out to people that you normally would not interact with and trying to build some balance and hope out of that?
Yes, well, I love what Alessandra shared around volunteering. And yeah, really, I think in any situation where you have a group of people, maybe you don't know them initially all that well, but when you are working together on some kind of common project, like for me, I volunteered in the community with a mentoring program where adults in the community are matched with teens at local schools, helping them set goals. But then also there is a community process that's part of that, where all of the adult mentors and all of the mentees meet together, talk about some of the struggles they're having, go through team building things and talking about the goals that the mentees have. And I think when you're engaged in that kind of project, that kind of larger goal or project with other people, the focus isn't so much on, okay, what do you believe or what do you not believe? And focusing on these deal breakers that would make you not want to associate with somebody. Instead, the focus is on, okay, what do you have to offer? What are you bringing to the group? And what is your role in the solution here, in what we're trying to build? And I think when we focus on each other's roles and how we are contributing to these things that are larger than any of us, that helps to cultivate the kind of community where we start to feel more unified, even if we have these beliefs that if we were engaging in debate with one another, we would probably be on very different sides of the aisle. So, yeah, volunteering is a great space for this, but anything can be within a religious community, anything where you're working on a larger project with a group of people that aren't necessarily your family or close friends.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Marion, anything you want to add to this discussion?
Yeah, I was going to take a tiny turn here just to highlight some things that we've been, doing, because even among folks who generally have the same set of values and agree, let's say, they're all in a, we don't like the current president or, something in that respect. We have disagreements. We have disagreements. I think, I just will highlight two examples and lead towards how do we disagree with each other? And it's a skill. It's a skill, and we need good facilitation, good moderators, people who are willing to play that kind of role. So we recently had a mayoral election in San Francisco, and in our group, we had very strong opinions about different candidates. And we spent, one whole session talking about what we liked about candidates, what we didn't. I mean, we weren't necessarily changing minds, although in some instances we did, but we were trying to practice the process of discussion, debate in respectful, and I really want to highlight that, respectful ways. And similarly, around this new campaign of Proposition 50, the election rigging measure that will be on the ballot, there is a fair amount of, yes, I'm willing to vote for it, but I really don't like it. And how do we talk about that? How do we engage one another when we are opinionated in fair conversation? And I think that's, we need to work on that. And I think it's important, not just for those who sit on the other side, because some people on the other side are just stuck in and they really don't want to talk to us. But with each other, how do we talk to each other so that we come up with the kind of solidarity that will really move our broader values, our deep-rooted values, because we don't have to agree on absolutely everything. We don't. So that's
Agreed. So I was just about to throw another question at all three of you, and then we got a comment that rolled in from Cheryl, which is kind of related to what I wanted to ask. What I was going to ask all of you, a very straightforward question, is granted the Ollie members may not have the same addiction to media, especially things like social media or even digital devices that say undergraduates and younger persons have, but they can probably see it. So I was going to ask a question about whether you think somehow distancing ourselves or giving ourselves time off from social media screens, even though we're on a screen right now, and I get that. But the question that rolled in was basically, well, volunteering and all this is all good and well, but any action ideas for someone who basically can't interact really in person? Now, the first thing I thought of was, of course, technology. So, since we're talking about balance and hope, how would you kind of balance and hope? That doesn't make sense. How would you look at the interplay between technology that can bring us together but can also divide us, and this idea of cultivating balance and hope? I'll start with you, Elizabeth, if you don't mind. Put you
Yeah,
on the spot.
I think right. The technology thing, it's definitely a double-edged sword. I think one thing that can help is when we distinguish between, on the one hand, spaces like social media, where it is this fire hose all the time, there are all these polarized opinions flying at us left and right, versus a space like, say, a Slack group or a more private Zoom group where you really are able to engage in a lot of the same community building, discussion, planning that you can do with people in person. So I think part of the key is just to be very intentional about the kinds of online spaces that you're entering. And for me, I've been trying to retreat more from social media. I won't say that I'm doing a perfect job at this by any means, but finding that community, that sense of purpose is much more something like in the private Slack groups that I belong to. Like I belong to a group of science writers all over the country, and we support each other, we plan, we scheme, we do all sorts of things within these groups. And for somebody who may have mobility challenges or disabled or not able to interact in person for whatever reason, I think seeking out these groups can be very important. And you can do this even if you're not somebody who does social media at all, if you're not somebody who likes to post and wait for the replies to roll in, like engaging in that kind of very barbed interaction. I think finding the right kind of spaces, and you'll know if the space that you're part of is nourishing you or depleting you. So I think seeking those out is very important.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Alessandra, any thoughts on how technology either leads us away from or takes us towards balance and hope?
I'll just add to echo sentiments that have already been shared before. I time box my time on social media, meaning I allow myself a certain amount of time in the morning and the evening so that I'm not taking in all these messages. I'm not drinking from a fire hose. I'm not overstimulated throughout the day. And so that news included. I tend to get my news from a local news source that has an app so that I'm not constantly playing CNN or whatever on a loop kind of in the background because I work from home. So I time box. I set an amount of time that's reasonable for me to take in media, to hear what's going on in the news cycle locally and nationally. And then I usually will take a walk or get some sun afterwards. So I literally will step away from a screen and reconnect with my body, do some deep breathing, some stretching, a walk, because that helps it create a sense of balance as well. And then I utilize media sources that aren't as popular. So, for example, I've really come to like a site called Eventbrite. So it's both an app and a website. And so oftentimes there are virtual and in-person opportunities to join a community, everything from knitting to creative writing to mentorship groups. So Eventbrite is a free website. I'll drop it in the link. You all are probably very savvy and may have heard of it. But if you haven't, I'll drop a link, right? But this idea of how do I engage with others without leaving from home? I totally hear that. And Eventbrite has been a source that I found to be useful because it's a way to build community, but still do it safely from home.
Thank you, Alessandra, and please do drop that link. I think people would find it very helpful. Marion, anything to add to the conversation about technology and balance and hope?
Yeah, I mean, I really do like, I think Elizabeth and Alessandra were talking, limit my engagement with social media pretty tightly. I find doing jigsaw puzzles is a really great, you know, focused effort that takes me away from all media, but, keeps me alert. Uh, I do pick out a couple of things. There's a wonderful site, Jess Craven, Chop Wood, Carry Water for California. And she puts out a newsletter, I think every day. And she has a long list of to-dos, like that you can make a phone call. And even if it's one, if you can make one phone call, that is really important participation. And the organization Bay Resistance is facilitating the creation of small groups of people of all ages who can work together, much like the group that I host. And many of them are meeting on Zoom. And they do create community, build relationships, you get to know people. And, Bay Resistance will help find you a pod that would relate to your interests. So it's another place where you can engage. And I think Zoom is great because a lot of people can't travel, and especially as the time change and it gets darker earlier, people don't want to be out at night. I think that's going to be an important option, and we shouldn't diminish it because it really is a tool that helps us feel connected and engaged.
Thank you for that, Marion. I will share with everyone an anecdote from one of my classes. I had a technology problem in one of my classrooms, and there's a number you can call for assistance. And I turned to one of my students. I said, "Could you please call for me because I don't have my phone on me?" And the entire class gasped with disbelief that you could go anywhere without having your phone on you. And I was like, "Yes, you can actually just go out and do things like look at trees and all sorts of crazy things like that." Um, at this point, I think it's helpful for other people to kind of hear what other people think of when they think of the two terms that are kind of at the heart of what we're talking about here. So this time around, I'm going to choose a random order. I'll start with you, Alessandra. I'm curious if you have a definition or an idea of what if I asked you, how would you define balance in a life? What is a balanced life? Or alternatively, what gives you hope? Can you name one thing that's like, I do this, it gives me hope? I think people learn from what other people do to keep balance and hope. So, Alessandra, any thoughts on that?
Mm, I am constantly asking myself, what do I need to create a sense of balance? Even the word balance is tough because it I don't know that things that I do to support myself are kind of equally divided. So it's doing things to move my body. Right now, I'm really into hiking and boxing. It's volunteering in my community. I run a scholarship program for women and girls under 18 and women over 30 who want to return to school. Sometimes it's getting enough sleep because I struggle with it's some days I'm very good at time boxing my media, and some days I am not. And sometimes my thoughts will run away, and it's hard for me to actually shut my brain down. So if I'm being honest, creating balance so that I feel whole is a daily challenge for me. It sometimes means that I have to have a wider piece of the pie for self-care and sleep or movement or community engagement. But I think what gives me hope is the fact that I truly believe in the good of people, and I think it's because I have to. I think the alternative, the belief that people are not inherently good or that, our society is headed in a direction that, we're going to implode and, everything's going to fall apart in 15 years, that gives me so much anxiety, and dampens any sense of hope that I would have that it really can become paralyzing. So I choose to believe that people are inherently good, not meaning there's potential in every person. And if I attach myself to communities and organizations that have missions that are aligned with mine, that our collective effort can turn the tide, can create positive influence. And so that is a personal belief that I hold in addition to like spiritual or religious beliefs that give me some hope, and help me create balance every day.
All right, thank you for that. I'll go next to Elizabeth. Any thoughts? I have a feeling the word pacing might come up, but what in your opinion is a balanced life, or what gives you hope?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's so many different kinds of balance. I think maybe I'll start with what gives me hope, though. In my work, like when I'm engaged in work that I honestly feel like at least has potential to be part of the solution, whether it's writing a story that helps people understand a concept better than they did before, or gives them ideas for how to engage in more effective ways, or how to avoid getting swamped in despair. That's important for me. But that said, just on a more balanced level, I know that I am not the kind of person who can work 60 to 80 hours a week. Now, there are plenty of people out there that can do that, and that's wonderful for them. And if you thrive on that, like that's great. But so much of it is about self-knowledge, about being willing, I think, as Alessandra said, to sort of check in with yourself and be like, okay, what do I need in this moment? And maybe being more honest about that than our culture typically encourages us to be. Like there's so much valorization of just push through, give 110%. And I think it encourages us to stifle what we actually need. So I think for me, just a practice that has been very helpful, especially when I'm feeling overwhelmed or frazzled or like the sky is falling, whatever I'm feeling in that moment. Like asking myself, what do I actually need, and carrying that out. Sometimes what I need is to take a walk for 15 minutes. Sometimes what I need is to call a friend to just vent or unload about whatever is going on in that moment. And that it doesn't have to be about, okay, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm going to withdraw for the rest of the day or the rest of the week. It's just like, okay, I'm going to take this 15-minute or 30-minute break, and then I'm going to check back in again. Like, okay, how am I feeling now? What can I handle? What can I not handle? And sort of this iteration and checking in with ourselves, like more so than we typically do. I feel like it's a practice that a lot of people can return to and just test it out and see how well it works for you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Marion, any thoughts on what a balanced life might be, or what gives you hope?
Well, we're not in a balanced time, so I just want to be honest about that. And everyone has said it, but I do think uh, building community helps me with balance because I know, and I think either Elizabeth or Alessandra said this already, that there will be times when I need to step back, and then I know there's someone else that will step forward. So that is a very confirming feeling for me. And I think that community gives me so much hope that we can act collectively, with one another and that we're not alone. That gives me tremendous amount of hope. And like Alessandra, I definitely tend to be hopeful in the action verb of that word, person. So yes, we need to act in community. We need to build those relationships with one another at a micro level in order to act at a macro level. And gives me a lot of hope because I see that happening.
All right then, thank you for that. I'm going to turn our attention now. We had one question and a few comments that kind of echoed this a bit. We're talking about balance and hope, and that is the focus of today. But the reality is, we're humans, and sometimes we're going to have negative feelings as well. So we had a question about what do you think of anger as a motivator? And my 2 cents on this is, everybody gets angry from time to time, and anger for me is what I call a very expensive emotion. It absorbs a lot of energy in ways that others don't, but that's just my 2 cents. I'm curious, and I'll start here with, let's see, how about if I start with Alessandra this time? How do you feel about, can anger be a motivator and liberator, or do you think anger is probably not the right way to go?
I think there's definitely such thing as righteous anger. I think anger is a natural and healthy emotion. And I've experienced anger, despair, sadness, hope, all of those things in the past month and definitely over the past few 5 years, right? So before we knew COVID was a thing, then once we knew what COVID was and the social unrest that we experienced in 2020, 2021, 2022, like there's just so many things to be angry about. I think the key is checking in with yourself and allowing yourself to feel that. And then inevitably, because it can be depleting and paralyzing, shifting that anger towards, like shifting the energy of the anger towards action. Right. And so that's why we continually, as us as panelists, are talking about the power of community. How do you shift that so you don't wade in the anger, which can lead to anxiety and depression and just really feeling kind of stuck in a space where it's hard to really do any good? How can you shift that anger towards meaningful action? And it's a process. But yes, I do think anger is completely understandable and normal.
Marion, any thoughts on anger as a motivator?
I just ditto to everything Alessandra said and validate anger. I mean, if you're not angry now about, what's coming at us and all of the craziness, I'm not sure, then you've become numb. And that's dangerous also. I mean, you've become acclimated. So I feel angry every day, but I do try, as Alessandra suggested, to go to my exercise class, calm myself down, and move forward. Take that anger into an action-oriented step. Or not. I mean, maybe I just need a break. That's possible too, and I'll go that way as well.
Elizabeth, any thoughts on anger as part of the greater good?
Yes, I definitely agree that righteous anger is so important. But I like the distinction that Greg Boyle at Homeboy Industries makes between moral outrage and moral compass. He says, oftentimes when we see something so awful that's happening, we immediately shift to moral outrage. And I think it's totally natural to move into that stage. But he also says if you stay in moral outrage too long, you kind of allow it to become about you, and that's where your energy starts to get depleted, and you can get so outraged that you end up spinning in circles and not doing anything. Moral compass is more about, okay, here's what's happening, here's what's going on. What am I going to stand for in the midst of that? And that kind of puts the focus more on what is the action step here? What am I actually going to do? What am I going to stand for potentially in ways that could inspire others and motivate them to be that moral compass as well? So I think we move through the moral outrage phase, yes, and that's okay and that's important. But in the end, we return to to moral compass. And that's what I'm trying to do. Sometimes it's very difficult, and I slide back into the moral outrage, as I'm sure so many of you do sometimes too, but pointing yourself back, like being patient with yourself to point back to the moral compass.
All right, thank you for that. I want to throw something practical out to everybody right now. We're in our last 9 minutes, and so I am going to give all the panelists one last uh, moment to add anything they want here in just a second. But I do want to point out to not only to the panelists, if you want to recommend something, you can add it to the chat like a website. I know some of you have already done this, but for the rest of you, if you don't know this, there's 3 dots at the top of the chat on Zoom. And if you click on that, one of the options is to save the chat. So if you're like, well, I can't write down the links fast enough, just save the chat. It'll save it on your own device and you can look at it later. So as we get down to our last 10 minutes, I will give each of our panelists kind of a final moment to either share their final thoughts or perhaps, sometimes it's like, this is all well and good, but can you just point me in a direction if the question were, what one thing could someone do today to take that first step towards more balance and hope? If you have any recommendations, if there is one thing you'd like to share, you can do that. Otherwise, just if you have any final thoughts you'd like to add, I'm going to go back to our original order of presentations, and I'll start this time with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, any final thoughts or any one thing to recommend as a first step?
Yeah, I think that one thing can be a very small step. It could be maybe if you've been thinking about a certain kind of volunteering that you might do, but you've been putting it off, like send that email, join that list, like take the first step toward involvement. Or maybe in terms of cultivating community, like reach out to somebody that you haven't talked to for a long time. Just send that text, hey, I know we haven't caught up in a while. Um, and one thing that I think is going to be very important in the upcoming months and perhaps years is, especially in our local communities and our neighborhoods, to have these stronger in-person ties, because we don't know when we're going to need them or the purpose that we're going to need to use them for. So if you can just take one step today toward cultivating that kind of connection, maybe it's just, knocking on your neighbor's door and dropping off some cookies. It can be any small thing like that. Like don't think that it has to be a big move. Just one thing at a time, with an eye toward creating that community that's going to uplift you and uplift others, and really create hope for everybody.
All right, thanks for that, Elizabeth. Marion, I'll go to you next. Any one thing to recommend or any final thoughts?
Well, I know we're not supposed to be political in this environment, but I would just say get involved with Prop 50, talk to your neighbors. Even if you just talk to 2 neighbors, we need people to come out and vote. But I was going to just highlight a phrase from Aurora Levin Epstein, who is a Puerto Rican Jewish author and poet that I've just, come to appreciate. And she said, to live a lifetime of audacity, dwelling in the place where joy meets justice, year after year, can only be sustained by being so in love with a vision of what's possible that we no longer flirt with despair. So I just encourage everyone to have that vision and join with others in building it.
All right. Thank you for that, Marion. And lastly, Alessandra, any suggestions for one thing to do today or any final thoughts?
You know, my fellow panelists already shared very thoughtful answers to, one thing that you can do, one action you can take, sending an email, looking at some of the resources in the chat, reconnecting with folks maybe in your circle or your community that hold similar beliefs and seeing if you can just have that conversation, just start. I think those are all great actions. And also a reminder that this idea of being of service, of being an ally, of contributing to change or a change that you like to see, it is a process. So being patient with yourself and others and really reminding yourself that it's a process or a journey, consider it that way as well, meaning it's multiple small efforts that will shift change over time. It can be very easy, especially when we're in a place of fear, anxiety, or anger. You want to see a change right now. But that's very rarely how change happens. It's a collective effort over time.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Alessandra. And here's what I'm going to do. I think it's we got about 5 minutes left. I would like to say this. First of all, I'd like to give my absolute sincere thanks to Elizabeth, Marion, and Alessandra for sharing their perspectives and their insights and showing us, shining a light, showing us where to start. I also want to thank all the Ollie folks for being here, simply because for me, education is activism, and just taking a class or signing up for a town hall is itself kind of a moment of activism. It's an act of hope. You're saying, I want to learn something new because I want to walk down a path where things do get better. So thank you all for being here. And speaking of last words, I also need to ask Susan if she has anything left to say to bring us to the conclusion of today's town hall. Susan?
Yeah, Darren, thank you. I want to join in thanking our panelists. This has been so inspiring, sobering, inspiring, and I think you have given not only great thought, but also inspiration and led by example. As Darren had mentioned, you can go to the three dots at the top of the page, save the chat, it will be sent to you, and then you will have the resources, that have been recommended. And this has been such a not only aspirational but very practical exchange that we've had. I also just want to underscore that, Ollie does work with students on campus, as Darren mentioned, in the Words Over Time and his course that's looking at the Constitution and the rule of law. We're also trying to support their civic engagement efforts, so please look out for that. I want to say that want to just share my own moment that I had this last weekend. I went to the Flower Piano that's in the Botanical Garden in San Francisco. 12 different grand pianos placed throughout that beautiful landscape at Golden Gate Park. And the pianos are there. It is all extemporaneous. Whoever sits down to play, people gather and just as they are walking through the garden. And I stopped and listened to a player who began to play "Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow," Fleetwood Mac song, which I was really surprised. I was hearing it very differently for the first time. And as I stayed with the 100 or more people that gathered around, we began to sing together. And that singing in unison, he led us to then singing John Lennon's Imagine. And tears were flowing. And I think that there was such a feeling of connectivity and cohesiveness and, in some sense, possibility, that it made me come back to the Ollie staff and say, I think we need to really promote Sweet Harmony with Pete Elman at Freight and Salvage as one of the remedies that can help pull us up for the moment, singing some of those old songs as Pete helps us do. And then we also have the Joy of Singing that will be happening in Lafayette. So just those personal pieces to say contained within the Ollie curriculum, there are things that can help inspire hope. And then finally, know that Fridays are very active on the Ollie calendar. We have Mill Valley Film Festival next week, the following week on October 10th with Darren around talking the intergenerational exchange on the rule of law and the Constitution. And then following the next weeks after that, stellar academics from Berkeley and UC Santa Cruz. Barbara Epstein is talking about what did we learn from the movements of the 60s. A really important conversation. Barry Eichengreen, our international economist, is talking about the value of the dollar And then Bruce Kane, who was at Berkeley and is at Stanford, is in fact talking about Prop 50 and the issues of gerrymandering. And then finally, we'll close with Randy Sheckman, who is a Nobel Prize winning scientist, who will talk not only about his work, but also will address the impact of these budget cuts on academic research. So I hope that you will join us for one or all of those events, and have a great weekend in this sunshine.